When Alexei Volkov first encountered the receptionist at Trax Corporation, her presence captivated him completely. Not in a literal sense, but her sultry elegance ensnared his thoughts. Those dark eyes, peering coyly over her graceful glasses, left him mesmerized. "Miss," he stammered, his tongue feeling heavy and dry. With a bright smile, she set aside her pen and clasped her hands together. "Washington. Elaine Washington." Her voice had a husky charm reminiscent of a 1930s film star. Alexei presented his business card. "Hello, Elaine. I'm Aaron Miner from Gulf Coast Cybernetics." Elaine examined the card. "You traveled all the way from Biloxi to Grosse Pointe? What brings you here?" Alexei leaned slightly over the counter, speaking in a conspiratorial tone. "I have a meeting with Mr. Gary Monroe. I'm here to tour your facility and discuss potential collaborations." Elaine rose gracefully, and Alexei found himself more drawn to her with each passing second. She matched his height, accentuated by her black pumps. Dressed in a black silk suit with gold pinstripes and a red blouse beneath, her slender gold chain sparkled at her collar, while rings of the same metal adorned her fingers. Her midnight hair was styled elegantly atop her head, highlighting her well-formed ears. "Let's see if he's available," Elaine laughed, tapping on the rosewood door to Monroe's office. Alexei's heart raced as he watched her long legs encased in black hosiery move. "Yes," came a voice from inside. Elaine opened the door. "Mr. Monroe? There's an Aaron Miner from Gulf Coast Cybernetics here to see you." "Aaron!" Gary exclaimed, quickly exiting his office. The rest of the day blurred for Alexei as he juggled his responsibilities touring the Trax facility while thoughts of Elaine Washington danced through his mind. Another photo clicked from the camera hidden in his briefcase, his thoughts lingering on her elegant legs and graceful neck. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Alexei finished his tour, exhausted but satisfied. "So, I'll see you tomorrow morning then," Gary said, shaking Alexei's hand. Alexei pointed at him, 9 o'clock sharp. "I need to learn about your biological interface hardware." Gary chuckled, "We'll see what we can do, Aaron." From the corner of his eye, Alexei caught sight of Elaine Washington as she headed to her sleek, midnight blue Lexus. "Gary, you have an impressive setup here. First-rate facilities, and everyone seems happy. It must be a great place to work." Gary glanced at the modest buildings. "We prioritize our people's happiness. They're the best in their field, and we treat them as such." "Salary, benefits, all that?" Alexei asked. "Absolutely," Gary affirmed. "And do you know what that achieves for us?" Alexei shook his head. "We're industry leaders in productivity. Our engineers lose almost no time, some even come in on Saturdays because they want to." "All because you value them appropriately?" "We pay them what we believe they should be worth," Gary responded firmly. Alexei waved goodbye to Elaine as she drove away. "Including receptionists? Even Miss Washington?" Gary watched the Lexus disappear. "Elaine is special." Alexei nudged Gary playfully. "Oh, she's definitely special. A provider of executive services?" Gary laughed awkwardly. "No, Elaine's interests lie elsewhere." With one last handshake, Gary confirmed, 9 o'clock, Aaron? 9 o'clock. As Alexei drove to his hotel, Elaine filled his thoughts. His associates, Victor, Adrian, and Katya, awaited him. Alexei loosened his tie and relaxed. "Cursed Americans," he muttered, tossing his briefcase to Adrian, a slight blonde man. "Where's the vodka?" Victor responded in Russian. "Speak English, Sergeant Breskov. American prisons are supposed to be like hotels compared to ours, but I don't want to find out just because you forgot the language." "Apologies, Colonel Volkov," Victor replied sheepishly. Alexei poured himself a glass of vodka. "And for as long as we're in this town, I am Aaron Miner from Gulf Coast Cybernetics." Remember who you are. He filled another glass with stolichnaya and turned to his team. Adrian was already unpacking the camera gear and loading the digital reels into their mainframe. So, who are you? Alexei asked. With pride, Victor declared, Sergeant Viktor Breskov of the Glavnoy Razvedavatelnoy Opravilny. Not in America, you clown. Here, who are you? Victor faltered, then spoke in a Texas drawl, Jake Hartman, systems analyst for Gulf Coast Cybernetics. Alexei nodded, meeting Katya's gaze. And you, Sergeant? Katya flipped her hair. Not conventionally attractive, the Red Army had hardened her demeanor. She replied with a playful accent, Rachel Morrison, software designer at the same company. Alexei nodded again. Adrian? Adrian's bleary eyes remained fixed on the computer screen, where images from Trax Corporation cybernetics labs flickered rapidly. Sergeant Patchkin, you need to speak. Raphael Soderberg, a Texas drawl, interjected. Alexei leaned against the doorframe of their suite's bathroom, setting down his glass. All right, let's outline our assignments. Who's that? Adrian asked, glancing at the screen. Alexei looked up to see Elaine Washington smiling from the monitor. That, he sighed, is Mr. Gary Monroe's executive assistant. Her name is Elaine Washington. I need a complete background check on her. Why? Do you think she could be our ticket in? That Monroe is swimming in the secretarial pool? Alexei shook his head. I'm not sure. There's just something about her. Victor and Katya exchanged knowing glances. All right, let's focus. We need to get to work. By 9:30 the next morning, Alexei stood outside Gary Monroe's office, his gaze fixed professionally on Elaine Washington. Today, she wore a navy pantsuit and a white blouse, her raven hair pulled into a ponytail secured by a turquoise ring. She's stunning, Alexei thought. Every time he tried to concentrate on their espionage mission, his mind drifted back to Monroe's regal receptionist. This isn't good, he muttered in Russian. Elaine looked up and smiled. Mr. Minor, he shouldn't be long. The brothers don't like extended meetings. Alexei noticed that her lipstick and eyeshadow matched her suit. The brothers? Her smile revealed teeth like small pearls, though perhaps not that small. Mr. Monroe's family owns Trax Corporation. His brothers, Grant and Gerald, work just down the hall. They try to meet once a day. Her words were melodic. Like right now? She laughed and nodded, her giggles enchanting him. Alexei trudged through the day, only to return to the hotel room later. As he opened the door, he heard Victor and Katya making a ruckus. What's going on? He snapped. We're watching, OH. Did you see that? We're watching the game, Katya explained, shoving another handful of popcorn into her mouth. Alexei poured another glass of vodka. What game? He was offside. He was offside. Victor shouted, gesticulating at the flickering screen. You're watching hockey? Alexei exclaimed. We're supposed to be uncovering Trax Corporation's secrets, and you're glued to a hockey game? The Red Army is winning, Victor offered quietly. What's the score? Alexei asked before he could stop himself. Red Army 4, Detroit Red Wings 2, Katya shouted. Alexei shook his head. How did you get the hockey game? Victor and Katya stared at him in disbelief. This is America, Colonel. Katya nodded and added, you can find anything here. Alexei rolled his eyes and leaned over Adrian's shoulder. Have you been watching hockey all day too? Adrian shook his head. There are some fascinating developments going on in there, Colonel, Mr. Minor. They seem to have solved the direct neural interface issue. Alexei draped his arm over Adrian's bony shoulders and turned to face Victor and Katya. You see? This has been a productive day. The GRU would be proud of Adrian. We haven't just been watching hockey all day, Victor said absently. Without looking away from the TV, Katya waved a folder at Alexei. What's this? He asked, taking it from her. You wanted a complete background check on your girlfriend, Miss Washington, Victor replied, gulping down coffee. There you go. Really? Alexei exclaimed, flipping open the folder. He felt the burden of a lost day begin to lift. Color photos, the size of typing paper, revealed a goddess come to life. There she was, Elaine Washington. Poised. Elegant. Flawless. Wearing the navy pantsuit, with her lipstick and eyeshadow perfectly matched, these must have been taken today. Who took these? You, Victor? Victor nodded. Yes, sir. They're stunning, Alexei breathed, awed. Victor and Katya exchanged doubtful glances. You know she doesn't exist, right? Adrian mumbled. What? Then who is this? Alexei barked, pointing at the top photo. That's Elaine Washington. Right, so what do you mean, she doesn't exist? Adrian turned in his chair. I hacked into their system today, like I was supposed to, and sifted through their personnel database. And? She's everywhere in there. She's been with Trax for nearly 6 years. But outside the personnel database, Katya added, she doesn't exist. No driver's license, no social security number, not even a home address. What? How can that be? Katya shrugged. She must have some kind of secret. Alexei glared at Victor. Sergeant Mikhailov. Popcorn spilled from Victor's mouth as he looked up. Yes, Colonel? You dodged the Mujahideen for 10 years. Can you follow this woman home from work tomorrow and surveil her there? Victor eyed the folder Alexei held. A pretty woman like that? It'd be my pleasure. It wasn't Victor's idea of pleasure to trail Elaine Washington into a rough Detroit neighborhood, a place he would have gladly fled back to war-torn Chechnya to escape. Yet, he was a professional and would persevere. He set up half a dozen fiber-optic cameras and was busy splicing telephone lines when he felt a tap on his shoulder. Hey! Victor spun around just in time to avoid the haymaker aimed at him, almost. If he had been one of the GRU's Spetsnaz, the beating that followed might not have been so brutal, but the tall, lanky man with closely cropped blonde hair who pummeled him was closer to Special Forces than Victor was. I don't know who you think you are, or why you're messing with my phone line, but you're going to regret it. Regret it? Alexei asked, frowning down at Victor while Katya pressed butterfly bandages on his swollen eye. Victor glared up at him. Yeah, I haven't been hit this hard since basic training. Why did he beat you up? Victor groaned, adjusting the ice pack on his other eye. He accused me of tampering with his phone lines. He caught me before I could get the tap set up. Were you? No. Just the Washington woman's lines. But you installed the fiber optics, right? Adrian chimed in. So we can see into her apartment? Yes, damn it, Victor snapped. I wouldn't want to deprive you of your thrills while the rest of us are out in the field getting beat up. And what did the guy who assaulted you look like? Adrian asked, seemingly oblivious to Victor's frustration. Oh God, how many times do I have to repeat this? He was a little taller than me, maybe about 180 centimeters, but not as heavy. He was fit with really short blonde hair. So what? Would you say he was lean then? Of course. Can we drop it already? Adrian chewed on his pen for a moment before pointing at the monitor's screen. So, would you say he looked a lot like this guy? They all leaned closer to the monitor, which displayed a tall, lanky man with an athletic build, defined muscles, and well-formed ears. His peculiar, coy dark eyes stood out. What's this? Alexei asked. It's the live feed from the cameras Victor set up. Alexei turned sharply to Victor. That explains it. You got the wrong apartment. Victor stiffened. No, Colonel Volkov, I did not. I set up surveillance on the apartment where I saw Miss Elaine Washington enter. Maybe it's her boyfriend's place, Katya suggested. Or her lover's. Alexei rubbed his hand down his face, feeling Elaine Washington becoming an alluring enigma. She preyed on his mind and haunted his thoughts. He was in serious trouble now. Alexei had made a critical mistake, the kind that could lead to exile, not in a biblical sense, but in a way that he could take some pride in. It was a significant error, yet not so grave that it would cost him his life. No, Alexei's punishment was, in many ways, worse than a complete demotion. He'd been sent to America with 2 hockey-crazed misfits and a spaced-out number cruncher for company. If he played his cards right and successfully infiltrated Trax Corporation, he might just get to return home. Provided he could somehow banish Elaine Washington from his thoughts. Inside the main building of the expansive Trax Corporation complex in Grosse Pointe was a magnificent, sunlit atrium made of gleaming transparency. A veritable forest thrived within, and beside a robust plant that cascaded emerald foliage nearly to the polished marble floor, Alexei spotted Elaine, quietly reading. She was breathtaking, he thought. Glancing at his watch, he mentally reviewed the day's agenda, concluding that he had time to talk to her. Adopting a charming smile that had melted many a heart, he strolled across the atrium, letting his eyes appreciate her radiant form. She wore a plum-colored suit made from an iridescent fabric that shimmered in the light filtering through the dome above. A golden necklace sparkled at her throat, and her fingers lingered amid the pages of her book, while her dark, bottomless eyes peeked through her elegant glasses. He savored the ethereal fragrance her graceful presence exuded, long legs, raven tresses, and well-formed ears. Her perfume was subtle yet wonderfully feminine, both captivating and strangely powerful. As soon as he caught sight of her book, Alexei seized his chance. He leaned down and gestured to it. I see you enjoy reading Nabokov. Elaine's smile took a moment to form, but when it did, the sun seemed to dim. Mr. Miner. How are you? Very well, thank you. And you? To illustrate her point, Elaine took a delicate bite of her bagel. Just having my lunch. And reading. Well, Mr. Monroe keeps me quite busy, so I don't get many chances during the day. Have you read Nabokov? Not in a long time. May I join you? Elaine shifted, making room by sliding her lunch bag aside. Many things about Trax Corporation impress me, Miss Washington, but none as much as you. Her smile was polite but frosty. That's lovely, Mr. Miner, but I'm afraid. Alexei quickly shifted to safer topics. I'd love to hear your, shall we say, inside perspective on Trax Corporation. Elaine closed her book but marked the page with a perfectly manicured finger. My inside perspective? What does that mean? Alexei held his briefcase with both hands and gazed off into space. At Gulf Coast Cybernetics, we consider ourselves a family business. In the cybernetics industry? It's so new that it's not even regulated yet. Alexei smiled. Yet Trax has been in business for over 100 years. Elaine smiled back, igniting something in Alexei's heart. Actually, it's nearly 200. Trax began as the Monroe Track and Chain Company in Wales before 1800, originally as a foundry. 90% of our output is still manufactured steel components. So how did Trax enter the cybernetics field? Elaine sighed. Like Gulf Coast, Trax is a family business. The Monroe family has owned and operated it since the beginning. And what are they like to work for? Alexei asked. No chasing around the desk antics, I hope? Elaine's smile was confident and superior, with a hint of slyness. There's little chance of that, Mr. Miner. Why? Is Mr. Monroe married? Married? Elaine laughed. He's probably the most eligible bachelor in Detroit. So you mean you two have never? Elaine smiled again. What brings you here today, Mr. Minor? You've surely extracted everything possible from Gary this week. What more could you possibly need to know? Alexei felt a jolt from her abruptness, but quickly covered. Oh, we're just wrapping things up today. He slapped his briefcase for emphasis. Signing papers, that sort of thing. Ahem. Miss Washington, I hope this isn't too forward, but I've been meaning to ask you something all week. Elaine's smile turned innocent, like a child caught stealing a cookie. Yes. Alexei's heart raced, and sweat started to bead on his palms. The sun suddenly felt much warmer. He cleared his throat. Would you like to grab a cup of coffee sometime? I pass a Starbucks on my way here every day. Elaine flashed her pearly smile again. You mean a date? Mr. Minor, wouldn't that be a conflict of interest? She seemed on the verge of laughter. Alexei patted his briefcase again. A few scribbles, and that's not a problem. What do you say? Elaine paused to consider. Then she pulled a gleaming silver case from her blazer pocket and took out a business card. May I borrow your pen? Elaine could have borrowed Alexei's heart if she'd asked for it, but he offered only his fountain pen. She scribbled something on her business card and handed it back along with the pen. It sounds like fun, Mr. Minor. I'll meet you there at 6. Alexei clutched the card as if it were a lifeline. I would be delighted, he said, sweeping her hand to his lips. Elaine giggled. He barely noticed her reddened knuckles. He felt like Edmund Hillary upon reaching the summit of Everest or Jim Ballard when the first images of the Titanic resurfaced from the depths. Unfortunately, Victor and Katya did not share his elation. You made a date! Victor bellowed. So you're going out while we handle their corporate security? Katya growled. Alexei held up 2 neckties next to his collar, contemplating colors. Do I need to remind you too that I'm still your commanding officer? Come on, Alexei. We're military intelligence, not the KGB. Has the GRU ever operated this way? Katya rolled her eyes and shifted tactics. We're not in Russia anymore, Colonel. You can't play the Romeo of Rostov here. Alexei chose a tie and began fastening it. I can hope, can't I? Besides, insubordination is still insubordination, isn't it? So we get shot at by Trax's hired thugs while you're out with some girl? Victor shouted. Shot at? Victor, we're the GRU. Didn't you serve in Afghanistan? Do you really think any of these decadent Americans, especially their rent-a-cops, can hold a candle to the mujahideen who never even touched you in 5 years? Victor's pride silenced his protests. Alexei fastened his good cufflinks. Besides, it's not a date. It's just a drink. Colonel, Katya started, our best chance of getting rotated back home hinges on pulling this off with Trax. I don't like the United States, and I just want to see my husband in Sverdlovsk again. It would be a shame if my best chance to see him were ruined like this. Alexei paused to think. Successfully infiltrating Trax was his ticket home too. He could almost smell the summer grain ripening in the fields around Tobolsk. But Elaine Washington was the kind of woman that men dreamed about, well, that Alexei Volkov dreamed about anyway. It'll only be a few hours. I'll even meet you back at Trax later. He left Victor and Katya exchanging rueful glances, clearly pondering how Alexei had charmed his way through the Red Army, and took the Detroit Metro bus to his appointment. Alexei liked buses, and the ride allowed his anticipation to build. The club, was that the term? Maybe bar was more fitting. Elaine had invited him to was called Flynn's. It looked rough, but respectable. This is the working man's place, he muttered with a mix of revulsion and respect. God help me, but this is what they deserve. As he approached the entrance, he had to pass a shadowy alley. The darkness held little fear for Alexei, nor did the nickel-plated revolver that a wild-eyed youth thrust in his face. "Give me your wallet, hunky, or I swear to Christ I'll blow your head off." Alexei glanced up. "But it's night out." "Do you want me to kill you, white boy?" the gunman screamed. "Just my backside?" "No." "Have you been waiting in that alley all day?" Alexei felt the pistol pressed against his forehead. "All right, that's it." With barely more effort than scratching an itch, Alexei swatted the gun aside and landed a punch on the gunman's jaw in one fluid motion. "You should really choose someone other than a combat veteran to try to rob," Alexei remarked as he left the unconscious figure in the shadows of the alley. He studied Flynn's eagerly. It was a two-story building with large bay windows that looked welcoming and a balcony overlooking the street. The wedge-shaped structure had its main entrance on the ground floor and the balcony on the second floor. Alexei peered through the windows, noting the widely spaced tables, polished wood, and massive pool tables. "It's not much, but it's clean," Alexei muttered as he stepped inside. The rockin' blues of George Thorogood and the Destroyers hit him like a wave. The air was thick with smoke, stale beer, and sweat. Alexei caught the elbow of a passing waitress. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I'm looking for Elaine Washington. Can you tell me if she's here?" The waitress pushed hair from her eyes. "Laney?" "Yeah, she's here." Alexei beamed a matinee idol smile, which was infamous back in Russia, and asked, "Where might I find her?" The waitress chewed her gum, eyeing Alexei up and down. "And who might you be?" Alexei presented his business card with a flourish. "Aaron Miner. Gulf Coast Cybernetics." She examined the card. "You're the guy from Biloxi?" "Boy." Elaine returned his card. "She usually sits by the door to the balcony. You can look for her there." Alexei smiled and nodded. "Spasibo." The waitress watched him go. "Spasibo?" Alexei climbed the stairs and surveyed the second floor. It was quieter here, mostly couples enjoying their drinks. The doors to the balcony were open, allowing a gentle breeze to waft in. Then he spotted Elaine by the open portal, and words failed him, he was sure they would have failed anyone. She had let her hair down, cascading like the tresses of a Botticellian masterpiece past her shoulders. Gone were her glasses and business attire. Instead, she wore a navy cable-knit sweater and an ankle-length denim skirt, from which peeked an adorable pair of Baby Jane loafers. A bejeweled copper comb sparkled in her hair, and bronze-rimmed amethysts dangled from her earlobes. She sipped from a glass of dark beer and peered around, trying to ignore the lascivious stares from the single men seated nearby. "Miss Washington," Alexei called. She smiled and stood. "Mr. Miner?" "Hi." Once more, Alexei took her hand and brushed it against his lips, ignoring the peculiar bruising. "Aaron, please. We're not at work now." "All right, Aaron. You can call me Elaine." As they sat, Alexei asked, "The waitress downstairs called you Laney. Who? Kathy?" "I didn't catch her name." "It was probably Kathy. We've known each other for years." Alexei shrugged off his overcoat and looked around. "This is an interesting place. It seems you come here often." Elaine smiled and took another delicate sip of her beer. "What makes you say that?" Alexei set his cigarette case on the scarred tabletop and signaled the nearest waitress. "Your friend. Kathy?" "I suppose. She referred to me as the boy from Biloxi." "Have you been sharing stories from work with her?" Elaine pulled a cigar from her purse and unwrapped it. Alexei recognized the brand. He gestured toward it as she clipped the ends. "Cuban? MMHM. I have a friend who works for one of the Canadian airlines. She brings me a box whenever she's in town." Alexei offered her his lighter. "It's a bit uncommon to meet a woman who enjoys Cuban cigars." Elaine exhaled a plume of aromatic smoke toward the ceiling. I'm an uncommon kind of girl. Thus began a dialogue that lasted deep into the night. They went through several glasses of beer and even more cigars. Alexei found himself in a kind of rapture he could barely comprehend as his fascination blossomed into love. He simply couldn't get enough of her mannerisms and charm. He found himself asking silly questions just to hear her voice and telling the corniest jokes just to elicit her melodious laughter. Long past midnight, Alexei did what all gentlemen should and walked his new lady friend home. This isn't the best neighborhood, he laughed. A man I met here in Detroit told me he got beaten up not far from here. A slight shiver, not from the cold wind off Lake Erie, seemed to sweep over Elaine. She stood a little taller and straighter, appearing more resolute. It happens, she replied flatly. You have to be able to look after yourself. And does a delicate flower like you know how to look after herself? Alexei laughed. So captivated was he by the way her skirt swayed around her shapely legs, the expectant bounce of her breasts beneath her blue sweater, and how the wind whipped her hair about her face that he only half heard her response, "Try me and find out." When they arrived at her apartment building, an awkward moment stretched between them. Should Alexei offer his hand, a gesture that was both warm and respectful? Maybe he should kiss her, but if he did, where? On the cheek to show affection while keeping a distance, or on her soft, inviting lips, which he longed to touch but would be frightfully presumptuous? What if she invited him up? What protocol should he follow? Dating in America was very different from courting the wives of his fellow officers back in Russia. Elaine stood with her hands folded, peering coyly at him through her bangs. Alexei smoothed his hands down his sides. Well, Elaine, I must thank you. I haven't had this much fun in ages. She smiled shyly. Would you like to come up? For a nightcap? I could make you an espresso. Alexei felt as though someone had poured 1,000 gallons of ice water through him. I would love to, Elaine. She sauntered over to the building door, jangling her keys in the lock. All right, motherfucker, now you're dead. A hydrogen bomb seemed to explode inside Alexei's skull, and the asphalt rose up to meet him. He heard someone scream, "Aaron," but he had no idea who it was. A second explosion erupted across his hips, and his legs vanished beneath him. I'll teach you to punch me, you piece of shit. The blows came fiercely now, each one hammering him into the pavement. You've crunch. Gotta crank. Learn. Wang. That. Runch. When I tell you. Choom. To give me your goddamn wallet. Wham. I mean right now, honky. Yeah, man. Get him, Latrell. Get his wallet, Latrell. Alexei would have felt his pockets being emptied had he been able to feel anything below his kidneys. He did, however, feel the boots crashing into his ribs. He made out the black man who had tried to rob him earlier through a red haze as the thief Latrell and his 2 accomplices fled. Was all Alexei could manage to utter. Aaron, Elaine screamed, bending over him. She swept her hair aside and nearly sobbed. Aaron, are you alive? I can't feel my legs. I'll call a doctor. He grabbed her hand. No doctors. No police. What? She yelled in a most unfeminine way. Aaron, you've just been nearly beaten to death. What am I supposed to do? How can I help? Elaine was staring intently at the fleeing thieves, her distress seeming partly feigned. I need to get to a phone. A phone call? You need to make a phone call, Elaine snarled, her voice losing its melodic quality, growing harsher and more guttural. Yes. She half stood, but Alexei clung to her hand. She sighed and glanced around. Can you stand? Alexei fumbled around but found no strength, From the chest down, his body felt as unresponsive as the asphalt beneath him. With much unfeminine grumbling, which Alexei was too pained to notice, Elaine lifted him in her arms and carried him inside. Blinded by pain, he saw nothing until Elaine laid him on her couch. As his vision cleared, he found Elaine Washington towering over him, not looking pleased at all. "I should call the paramedics or the police to help you," she snapped, "and to find those men who did this." Alexei floundered. "You can't." What? "You must have insurance. Even if you don't, they're not going to let you die." "It's not that. They took my wallet." "So?" "Without my wallet, I'm not Aaron Miner." Elaine tilted her head back and laughed silently. "And just who would you be? Napoleon? Marcel Marceau?" A wave of pain stabbed at Alexei's heart. The remnants of his last meal and the vodka from Flynn's surged up, splattering a sour mess onto Elaine's hardwood floor. "Jesus Christ," she cursed, covering her mouth. Alexei wiped his lips on his sleeve. "Elaine. Miss Washington, can I trust you? I should throw you out the window after you vomited on my floor." Alexei scowled and swallowed hard. "No, can I place my life in your hands?" "You already have, by letting me bring you here. Unless I call a doctor soon, this might be where you die."